These are cold sparks, or so they say. I got this machine as an alternative to traditional fireworks. In this video, I'm going to investigate the claims of a cold spark machine and see if it's possible to have sparks that aren't hot. This year, fireworks were banned in many parts of the United States because of wildfire concerns. The area where I live is one of them. So how am I supposed to celebrate the 4th of July without any fireworks? Well, this is called a cold spark machine. Sources online claim the sparks are only 40 to 60 degrees Celsius. But that didn't sound right to me. In fact, most websites make it sound like these sparks aren't really hot at all. So I had to investigate this. So I'm going to be doing a lot of things that are very dangerous while making and interacting with sparks. Please don't try any of this. I also got permission from my local fire marshal to use this safely outdoors during the fireworks ban. So this is the powder that you pour into the cold spark machine. Now, unlike traditional fireworks, this isn't a pyrotechnic mixture of fuel and oxidizer. It's literally just tiny particles of titanium. So you pour the metal particles into this chute, and the machine heats it up. Inside is an electrically heated coil that reaches around 500 degrees Celsius. Okay, this should be hot enough now. Let's see if this works. Whoa! Yeah. Okay, it works. But are they hot? Okay, so first let's see if these are actually cold sparks. I'm just gonna hold my hand over them and see if it burns me. And it doesn't actually hurt. Now every once in a while I feel a tiny little hot spot, but overall it didn't burn me. So it's pretty clear on this low setting that the sparks pretty much just bounce off and don't really hurt my hand. But every once in a while I do feel a hot spot that does hurt, but not so much of a burning pain. But hands aren't really that flammable, neither are faces. So let's test if this can actually burn a piece of paper. Whoa, it doesn't even ignite the paper. It just leaves a few dark spots on here. And if you look on the other side of the paper, it's not dark at all, so it's not like heating up and burning through. So after this, I got a little overconfident. I wanted to show some slow motion footage, so I stuck my phone camera right over the sparks. Rookie mistake. After finishing filming, I looked at the glass over my camera lens, and it had actually been etched by the sparks. I couldn't believe it. So it melted the glass slightly where the sparks hit. So now things were getting confusing. Online sources say these sparks are well below boiling temperature, and I can touch them without even getting burned, but they literally damaged the glass on my camera lens. So are these sparks hot or not? Well, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. But before we continue, I've always known some information about my ancestors, but I wanted to know specifically how much of my DNA came from each of them. That's why I want to thank MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. So to do this, I did a simple cheek swab and sent it back in the mailer and then waited for the results. Now I expected to see European ancestry, but I wasn't sure what percentages I'd get. Okay, so let's check the results right now. My DNA showed that I'm 37% English and 18% Eastern European. It also gives a visual map showing where your ancestors likely came from. One feature I thought was really cool was the DNA matches. The system identified over 14,000 DNA matches worldwide, including a possible third cousin connection through my mother's maiden name and a Swedish link. My favorite feature was Ancient Origins, which compares your DNA to ancient populations from thousands of years ago. My results showed connections to groups from the Roman era, the British Isles, and other ancient European populations. They also recently added notable individuals. Mine showed a close match to Beethoven, and their DNA traits feature was surprisingly accurate. So when I looked at my traits, it suggested a higher likelihood of pursuing higher education and being good at problem solving. I think that matches me pretty well. One thing that I appreciate is that MyHeritage states in its privacy policy that it doesn't sell or license your genetic data. So if you've ever wondered what stories might be hidden in your DNA, check out MyHeritage using my link below. So use code ACTION to get the DNA kit for just $19 plus free shipping and a 30-day free trial. And thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to our experiment. There's only one way titanium particles can glow this brightly. You have to heat them up. not just to 500 degrees inside the machine, but somewhere closer to 1800 degrees Celsius to produce this brilliant white glow. So these particles aren't just warm, they're extremely molten hot. You can tell they're molten because when they hit a surface like my hand, they burst into smaller droplets that oxidize even faster. So this is where that sparking action comes from. So what's happening is that the machine heats the titanium enough that once the particles leave the nozzle, they rapidly oxidize in the air. In fact, in a previous video I made, you can see what happens when you blow air over hot metal. In that case, it was steel wool. And I just hooked it to a leaf blower, and you get a fountain of literal molten metal. The difference is that those molten steel droplets were much larger, so they stayed hot a lot longer and were way more dangerous. In the cold spark machine, the particles are tiny, smaller than a grain of sand, but they're still incredibly hot. But because they're so small, they cool almost instantly. You can actually see this in this slow motion footage. The particles start out glowing bright white and then fade to red and finally stop glowing altogether as they cool while falling through the air. So don't be fooled, sparks from a cold spark machine are extremely hot. But if they're so hot, why don't they burn my hand or light paper on fire? Well, first, each particle is incredibly small. Even though it's very hot, there's only a tiny amount of material, so it contains very little total heat. And second, the particles don't stay in contact with your skin for very long. They simply bounce off, same with the paper. Finally, unlike traditional fireworks, these particles don't contain their own oxidizer. So once they leave the machine, they're limited by how much oxygen they can get from the surrounding air. That means they cool rapidly instead of continuing to generate lots of heat, even on the ground. That makes them much less likely to cause burns or fires. But notice that I said less likely. They absolutely can start fires. There's actually been tragic events where these were used indoors and started a fire. I like to compare the sparks coming out of this similar to the sparks from a flint striker. The sparks are tiny but extremely hot, and most of the time they won't burn you or hurt you. But obviously under the right conditions, it can light a fire, like when you strike a lighter. So the magic of these sparks is that they're extremely hot, but because they're so tiny, they simply don't contain enough heat to do very much damage in most situations. To burn something, you don't just need a high temperature, you need enough heat to raise the temperature of whatever you're touching or trying to burn. But an individual tiny particle can be incredibly hot without containing enough total heat to ignite most materials. So overall, we had a great 4th of July with our cold sparks machine, which after making this video, I think it's a terrible name. It should really be called the really hot spark machine that usually won't burn you and only sometimes starts fires. But I guess that's a little harder to market. And before we end, remember to check out My Heritage to discover where you come from, who you might be related to, and what your DNA can reveal about your traits. And thanks for watching another episode of the Action Lab, and we'll see you next time.